Thank you very much, Jeff, and greetings to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be here. Although I'm introduced as Bobi Wine, which I appreciate, Bobi Wine is just a nickname that is unfortunately overtaking my real name. My name is Chagulanyi Sentamo Mitembo, and I lead the National Unity Platform Party, but I like to also introduce myself as an artist and a common Ugandan. First of all, I want to appreciate the collaboration of the United States with Uganda because, I mean, it identifies us as a state that is worth associating with. However, the collaboration comes largely to the detriment of the people of Uganda, well knowing that the fact is that Uganda has been under the military dictatorship of General Yoweri Museveni for the last 36 years. For the last 36 years, Uganda has seen gross human rights abuses. Today, as we speak, abductions are the order of the day, and this is open. Torture is the order of the day, and this is open. The regime does not hide it anymore. Unfortunately, even though every once in a while we get strong statements from the United States, those statements have become more or less cliche. The United States supports the Ugandan military with approximately $1 billion annually. Never mind the fact that it is open that the Ugandan military is culpable for gross human rights abuses. It is heading the Ugandan military and police is heading the list of gross human rights abusers. The United States continue to sponsor that. Why do I say the US continues to sponsor that? Because they know what exactly they are sponsoring. Many times we've raised our voices to the United States, asking them to make the respect of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights preconditions for collaboration. It is sad that we have not had a strong response in terms of action, thereby, confirming that indeed the United States is in many ways sponsoring operation back home. Now, I'll close by saying that the United States, when you are introducing it, you introduce it as the world's greatest democracy. So isn't it hypocritical for the world's greatest democracy to be the biggest sponsor of the abuse of democracy in Uganda? That's a question that I will leave to the United States, knowing that if America was led by a leader that will, be in power for 36 years, it probably would not be the great democracy, the great country that we all look up to. So the question is, does America want Uganda to be a democracy, a strong democracy like America, or do they still want us to just be as a pawn? As we discuss, maybe we'll attempt that. I thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Bobi. I like where you started because it leads me to the question I was going to follow up with, because you set basically a foundation that looks at what the US is doing now that is aggravating human rights violations or somewhat showing that they could be doing more, but there is something that's not being done. So my question really is, looking at the future, what do you think the US could do to genuinely improve the situation in your country? If you had, for instance...
Would you kindly start the question again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I was just alluding to the fact that you gave a good background of what the US is doing to contribute to the human rights situation in Uganda. And my follow-up question was going to center around looking at the future. What, in your view, is something that the US could do that could be helpful in improving the situation in your country? If you had a moment with the president, for instance, the president of America and the Secretary of State, what would be your message to them?
In one statement, I would say, do not sponsor our oppression. Do not pay our oppressors, because Uganda largely depends on foreign aid, and the US being our biggest donor, they know what exactly they are sponsoring. we could write a whole book about that. But our request has been precise. Please make democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights preconditions for collaboration, because it shouldn't be charity, it's collaboration. These are a collaboration of equals. Let it be about the values that bring us together: democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law.
Thank you so much, Bobi. I think I'll bring in Kawala into the conversation, because as an advocate for human rights, you've also seen many occasions in which the United States has pushed hard to defend human rights.
I am personally struggling to be polite in my communication because I don't want to sound angry, but I'm actually angry. You know, I'm trying as much as possible to avoid words like hypocrisy, words like intellectual dishonesty. However, Ka represents me a great deal. We indeed are not asking the United States to save us. We are only saying, stop sponsoring our oppression. We are not asking you to come save us. We are trying to save ourselves, but we're being held back, you know, because we are trying to fight to save ourselves, but we cannot fight against the American dollars. We cannot fight against the American trained soldiers and the American weapons. I will also want to add a word too about the issue of interest. And Khan mentioned it. It's about interest. Unfortunately, these interests in many ways come off not as moral interests. Because the first interest that brings us together as international community is morality, moral interests. However, General Museveni, in our case, and just like many other dictators all over the world, particularly in Africa, have learned how to play the interests of the international community. For example, in the context of Uganda, when General Museveni is drawing closer to the Chinese and closer to the Russians, he plays a blackmail card. He blackmails the United States, and you will find the United States rushing to deal with General Museveni in order not him to go deal with China. In any case, China and in many ways Russia, you know, give aid, mainly military aid, to Uganda without any condition. They don't put conditions of human rights. They don't put conditions of democracy because they're not democratic themselves. So that way, the United States seems to be falling in the trap. I want to believe that the United States knows exactly what they are doing. And it frustrates many democracy lovers to see that democracy and human rights is put on the periphery. This is just business. And I want to say that that is immoral. And also, the United States frustrates democracy lovers and lovers of institutions when they move on to deal with General Museveni as an individual. And I want to believe the same thing with other dictators like in Cameroon and others, you know, dealing with an individual, not a nation, that, you know, legitimizes the takeover of institutions here in Uganda. A few days ago, Ugandans were horrified by a statement that was made by the United States representative to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, that is the United States representative to the United States. She said a few days ago, and I quote, I want to quote, "We, the United States, still have a strong partnership with General Museveni. He has been and continues to be a strong leader in the region." Now, the United States, I wonder how it's going to explain to the world that it's not propping up strong men instead of strong institutions. So this comes at the backdrop of a rigged election. Last year, the United States Foreign Department issued a statement discrediting the 2021 presidential elections, where United States election observers were blocked from observing that election, an election that happened with a closed internet. I was the main challenger to General Museveni, but I was put under house arrest. My entire campaign team was arrested. Many of them are still languishing in military prison. Many people were massacred on the 18th and 19th of November 2020 during the campaign. Just a few days from now, we're going to be, observing the second anniversary of that mass murder. Unfortunately, with all that, the United States tends to continue hobnobbing with a dictatorship. So I want to conclude by saying that the United States looks really with a tainted image, hobnobbing with a known dictator, and yet it is known as the world's greatest democracy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bobi, for speaking up and speaking your truth, and certainly to Ka and to Zachariah as well. I think, obviously, we've talked a lot today about the evident disparity between rhetoric and reality in terms of U.S. foreign policy, particularly as it pertains to Africa, which is a very good segue to today's discussant with Elizabeth Shackelford, who wrote an entire book on this subject. So you're not the only ones who are frustrated. You have many frustrated people within the U.S. government as well. So with that said, I'm going to turn the stage over to our colleague, Nick Cheese.
As you said, he can commit the most heinous human rights abuses and still remain a key partner. What is he doing? How is he doing it? Are others following suit? Asks a questioner on our WhatsApp.
Thank you very much. You will allow me answer the question in two ways. First, what he has been doing. I can be sure of what he has been doing and maybe suggest on what he is doing. What General Museveni has been doing for the last 36 years is painting a rosy picture of his rule and Uganda. He has been able to smartly deceive the international community. You will notice that President Bill Clinton back in the 90s described General Museveni as a new breed of leaders. 36 years in power, General Museveni has spent a lot of billions of taxpayers' money in Uganda, paying lobbyists in the international community, paying companies to paint a rosy picture of his rule. And yes, he has presented himself as a benevolent dictator, as a Democrat. And part of our effort was to show, to unmask, to pull off the mask of General Museveni. When I ran for president last year, it's not that I was not aware of the situation. I was aware of the militarism, but because we knew that we had media on us, we wanted the international community to see what General Museveni is realistically. And we were able to show the world. The world can no longer pretend not to know what General Museveni is. The United States can no longer pretend not to know that they are propping up a tyrant. And we always have put a question that when Taylor did to the Liberians what General Museveni is doing to Ugandans, he was sanctioned. When Mugabe did what Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. When Saddam Hussein did what General Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. When Idi Amin did what General Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. Why then General Museveni is not being sanctioned? We believe that the United States, in many ways, it's looking at interests. And many times they've pointed at security and the war against terrorism, which we agree with. But we have told them time and again that they should deal with the country, not an individual. They should deal with institutions, not an individual. So I can say that I know what General Museveni has been doing in the past, lying and deceiving, and painting a rosy picture of democracy and putting up fake elections to justify that we have democracy. But right now, just last year, the United States election observers were blocked from observing the elections. The United States knows that besides all the massacres that have been carried out, besides the Kasese massacre, just 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago, more than 150 innocent citizens were massacred on the street, and nothing has happened. So allow me to throw back the question on the table, what General Museveni is doing right, and also to ask that, is the international community, is the United States, enticed by evil? Is it enticed by violence? Is it trying to prove to us that we who are nonviolent cannot be supported, but those that are violent are supported? That's a question that I want to bounce back to you.
Thanks so much, Bobby. I think, my answer to this is partly what Lizzie put in the chat, which is, I think one of the things that, Museveni has been particularly good at is finding the one thing the West wants and giving it to them. At one point that was a development partner. It was somebody who would lead on HIV/AIDS. Then when that dried up, it was Ugandan troops in Somalia. He's consistently tried to find the one thing that could make him attractive to a Western audience. And I once wrote in my book, Democracy in Africa, that if there was ever a kind of world championships for manipulating the international community, Museveni would win the gold medal every time, because he finds that one thing. And it's no coincidence, right, that as soon as a leader starts to have some troubles with their allies internationally, Paul Kagame, they start throwing troops at peacekeeping operations and into other countries, because then they become indispensable. And all of a sudden they can treat their citizens back home however they want, but because they're supporting international, programs in other countries, all of a sudden they get a pass. And I've talked to people, who've been involved in the administration of many countries who, like Lizzie says, are desperately, trying to promote democracy, who have said to me, as soon as those troops went in, our ability to speak truth to power in that country went away. So I think you're absolutely right. But I think it's also, we also need to be clearer, I think, about how good some leaders are at manipulating international preoccupations and the things that Kara said to basically keep themselves in power. Now, Kara, coming to you now. The question for you was, are there any international donors out there doing a better job? We've been pretty tough on the United States tonight. Are there good examples? Is there anybody you see out there who is doing a good job? Is there anyone, Bobby, you can come in again on Uganda. Is there anyone on Uganda you see as being credible and consistent and pro-democratic? From your point of view, is there anyone in Cameroon that you see as being, credible? We talked about America, but of course, this is a big realm of international donors. Is there somebody else out there doing best practice that the US could follow?
So I'm also, I will get to that question, but I think that the undermining of democracy, rule of law, and and especially the fight of Africans on the ground for democracy in their countries is what is fundamentally wrong. You are doing harm. So, you gave an example, I think somebody in the chat gave the example about women. Well, if you have an autocratic government in place and it has more women in it, excuse me, I'm a feminist, I fight for women's rights, but Biya having more women who, adhere to his philosophy of autocracy does absolutely nothing for me as a woman and does absolutely nothing for me in my country. And I think this is what is wrong with development cooperation, is that if you want to compromise, the fundamental foundation of a nation, because, yay, we trained 30 more women in entrepreneurship. You're compromising your own interests. And I think this is where, Lizzie really put the finger on it, which is, how do we get administrations that are elected for 4 years and need to get results in 4 years to understand that the long-term interests of their countries are inextricably linked to our long-term interests. Yes, you send peacekeeping forces to support, whatever initiative is going on internationally, but your human rights violations, your lack of respect for rule of law is going to create the next security situation. And what's outstanding to me is that this has been happening for decades. The US supported Mobutu for how long? And almost the length of time they supported Mobutu is how long Congo has been one of the most conflict-ridden, basket cases for the world once Mobutu was gone. So it's like this stuff is, again, it's, if you look at it from an interest base, the interests of the West are, as a whole, and the US in particular, are in creating, in supporting, these fundamental pillars to functioning democratic societies in Africa. So yes, international donors, international aid as a whole on a micro level, there are a lot of amazing things that are done. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Even in the seminars for democracy, which I question quite a bit, there are things which are done in teaching. It is important to teach Cameroonians who've lived under 40 years of Biya, to remind them what rule of law is, to remind them what fundamental human rights are, because we forget. We live under oppression for so long that we forget, and we're not conscious of what our fundamental rights are anymore. So yes, those things are important. All the things which are being done in agriculture, in our entrepreneurship, with women, with young people, all of those things are really, really important. But if we don't get the fundamentals right, there's no place to put those things. There's no way that training the 50 entrepreneurs will impact Cameroon on scale if we do not get rule of law in Cameroon, and if we do not get a state that is, fundamentally concerned about its citizens enough to provide electricity, to provide water. How are you going to entrepreneur in a continent where, 1 out of every 2 people doesn't have access to electricity? So I think we have been, because the fundamentals are difficult, they are complex. Here we have not talked about the coup d'etats within the last couple of years in Africa, which are basically the result of the support both on our continent and globally, because we have been supporting ignoring these rulers who changed the constitution to stay in power. We now have young people and armies who are like, you guys can't get rid of them? Well, we're going to get rid of them. We're going to get rid of them with a gun. And then now we have a real mess. Because that ruler is gone, but we've got guys with guns in charge of the country. So I think we're really at a crucial moment for Africa. We cannot do the surface stuff. We cannot be satisfied with these small little wins anymore. The continent is in serious trouble, and we need partners that will enable us to have leaders that are able to look at these fundamentals.
Thanks so much. And I think one of the things there I just really want to echo, I saw Jeff actually punching the air in celebration when you hit